She was hired as a cleaner, but the millionaire's mute son looked at her and called her mommy. My beautiful family, this is not just a story. This is a journey of love, pain, and miracles. Please stay with me till the end, because I promise it will touch your heart in the deepest way. I love you all so much. Now let's begin the most beautiful story together. Janelle Holt had always believed that broken things could be healed with the right touch, the right words, the right amount of love. She just never imagined that walking into the Leo mansion would test that belief in ways that would change 3 lives forever. The wrought iron gates of the Leo estate opened like arms, welcoming Janelle home, though she'd never been here before. Her 12-year-old Honda looked embarrassingly small against the sprawling Georgian mansion that rose before her, all creamstone and hunter-green shutters, surrounded by gardens that belonged in magazines. Janelle checked her reflection one final time, smoothing her dark hair into its professional bun and adjusting her crisp white blouse. At 29, she'd been cleaning houses for 2 years, ever since budget cuts eliminated her elementary teaching position, but nothing had prepared her for this. The exclusive Pristine Home Service had been thrilled to place her with Jack Leo, the cybersecurity mogul whose company protected half of Virginia's major corporations. But it wasn't Jack Leo's money that made Janelle accept this job. It was the whispered story, a widowed father and his 7-year-old son who hadn't spoken a single word since the day he was born, the same day his mother died bringing him into the world. Janelle had always been drawn to healing broken things. As a child, she'd rescued wounded birds and nursed stray cats. As a teacher, she'd specialized in children with learning disabilities and emotional trauma. Her grandmother used to say she had hands that could mend anything, and a heart too big for her own good. If there was a child in this beautiful, sad house who needed someone to believe in him, then maybe this was more than just a job. The front door opened before she could knock, revealing a man who literally stole her breath. Jack Leo was tall, easily 6'2", with broad shoulders that filled his perfectly tailored grey sweater. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his blue eyes held exhaustion that spoke of years carrying unbearable weight. He was devastatingly handsome, but it was the bone-deep sadness etched around those blue eyes that made Janelle's chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. "Miss Holt," he said, his voice a low rumble touched with Virginia breeding. "Thank you for coming. I'm Jack Leo." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Leo," Janelle replied, extending her hand with practiced confidence. His handshake was firm but brief, and she noticed he avoided direct eye contact. "Please come in," he said, stepping aside. The foyer took her breath away, marble floors in cream and gold, a crystal chandelier scattering rainbows across walls, and a curved staircase sweeping upward like something from a fairy tale. But despite its beauty, the house felt wrong. Too quiet, too clean, too much like a museum and not enough like a home where people lived and loved. "I should explain our situation," Jack said, leading her through rooms that could have been featured in Architectural Digest, but felt as warm as a tomb. His voice was carefully controlled, professional, but she could hear underlying tension. "The house is large. We need someone 3 days a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. General cleaning, some light meal preparation." They passed a living room with furniture that looked unused, a formal dining room with a table set for no one, and a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that made Janelle's book-loving heart ache. "Do you have questions about the work?" Jack asked as they entered a kitchen larger than Janelle's entire apartment. Everything was top of the line. Granite countertops, professional appliances, a center island that could have doubled as a landing strip. "The work sounds straightforward," Janelle said carefully, "but I should mention, I have experience with children. I was an elementary school teacher before I started cleaning houses. The agency mentioned you have a son." Something shifted in Jack's expression, a quick tightening around his eyes, barely perceptible stiffening of shoulders. When he spoke his son's name, it was with careful control of a man handling something infinitely precious and fragile. Henry, he's 7 years old. The way he said it, with such love and pain, told Janelle everything about this family's heartbreak. Jack paused, running a hand through his hair. Henry has never spoken, not a single word. He was born during difficult labor that took his mother. The doctors think the trauma of her death, combined with birth complications, created a psychological barrier. He's been in therapy since he was 3, but Jack's voice trailed off, and Janelle saw him swallow hard, struggling with locked-away emotions. He's very quiet, Jack continued. Keeps to himself mostly. Mrs. Rivers, our housekeeper, handles most of his daily care. You probably won't interact with him much, but if you do, please don't expect him to respond. He doesn't talk to anyone. Janelle's heart broke for this man and the impossible situation he'd been carrying alone for 7 years. A son who had never said "Daddy," never asked for water or said he loved him. The silence in this house wasn't just quiet, it was the absence of a child's voice, perhaps the most heartbreaking silence of all. "I understand," Janelle said softly. "I'm very comfortable around children, speaking or not." As if summoned by their conversation, soft footsteps echoed in the hallway. Janelle turned to see the most beautiful child she'd ever laid eyes on, walking slowly into the kitchen. Henry Leo was small for 7, with golden curls that caught morning light like spun silk, and eyes the color of spring leaves, stunning green that must have come from his mother. He wore jeans and a blue sweater that brought out those remarkable eyes, but there was something heartbreakingly solemn about his expression, an old soul quality no child should possess. "Henry," Jack said softly, his voice transforming with fatherly love, "this is Miss Holt. She's going to be helping us keep the house clean." Henry looked at Janelle with those wise, sad eyes, studying her face with intensity that made her breath catch. She could see intelligence there, curiosity, and something that looked almost like hope, as if he was searching for something he'd been missing his whole life. Without thinking, Janelle knelt down slowly, bringing herself to his eye level. She'd learned in her teaching years that the first rule of connecting with a traumatized child was to meet them where they were. "Hello, Henry," she said in the gentle voice she'd once used with her most fragile students. "It's very nice to meet you." For a long moment, Henry just stared at her. Then, to her surprise, he stepped closer, his small hand reaching out to touch the simple gold cross necklace she wore, her grandmother's gift, worn every day for strength and protection. "It's pretty, isn't it?" Janelle said quietly, not moving despite his proximity. "My grandmother gave it to me. She told me it would always keep me safe and remind me that love never really goes away, even when we can't see the people who love us anymore." Henry's fingers traced the cross gently, and for just a moment, something flickered in those green eyes, a spark of recognition, of connection, of something that looked almost like wonder. "Henry," Jack's voice was gentle but firm, "don't bother Miss Holt. She has work to do." But Janelle shook her head slightly, never taking her eyes off Henry's face. "He's not bothering me at all." She looked directly into those extraordinary green eyes. "You have beautiful eyes, Henry. They're exactly like your mama's, aren't they?" The question was instinctive, and she immediately worried she'd overstepped. But Henry nodded slowly, the first real response she'd seen from him, and something that might have been the ghost of a smile flickered across his lips. "She must have been very beautiful," Janelle said simply, meaning every word. This time, Henry's nod was more definite, and he stepped even closer, close enough that she could see faint freckles across his nose, could feel the warmth of his small body. Jack cleared his throat, and when Janelle looked up, she saw something complicated in his expression, gratitude and pain, and something that looked almost like fear. "I should show you the supply closet," Jack said. "Henry, why don't you go find Mrs. Rivers?" But Henry didn't move. Instead, he continued looking at Janelle with those penetrating green eyes, as if trying to solve some complex puzzle that only she could help him understand. "It's okay," Janelle said softly, standing back up but keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. "You can stay if you want to. Sometimes it's nice to have company while you work." As she began her first day in the Leo house, following Jack's brief tour and learning the routines of a family frozen in grief, Janelle couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into something much more significant than a cleaning job. This house held more than dust and silence. It held a broken man who had forgotten how to hope, a wounded child who had never learned to trust his own voice, and a love story cut short before it could teach a little boy that the world was a place where mothers stayed and fathers smiled. But Janelle had spent her whole life believing that broken things could be healed with the right touch, the right words, the right amount of love. Looking into Henry's extraordinary green eyes, feeling the weight of Jack's careful distance, sensing the grief that clung to this beautiful house like morning mist, Janelle made a silent promise. She was going to save this family, even if they didn't know they needed saving yet. Chapter 2. The Sound of Almost. 2 weeks into her mission to heal the Leo family, Janelle discovered that miracles didn't announce themselves with trumpets and fanfare. They whispered their first words in the golden silence of a grief-stricken house, spoken by a child who had never trusted his voice to anyone before. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times as Janelle pushed open the heavy front door, keys jingling softly in the morning quiet. 2 weeks of working at the Leo estate had taught her the rhythm of this wounded house. Jack left for his cybersecurity company by 7:30 sharp. Mrs. Thessaly Rivers arrived at 10 to handle Henry's breakfast and homeschooling, and Henry himself moved through the mansion like a gentle ghost. But this morning felt different. As Janelle hung her cardigan and gathered cleaning supplies, she realized what was missing: the soft padding of Henry's feet on the hardwood floors above. Usually she could hear him moving around his room. Today there was nothing but deep silence that made old houses feel haunted. She climbed the curved staircase and made her way to the second floor. Jack's master bedroom was already immaculate, bed made with military precision, not a single item out of place. It was like a hotel room, she thought sadly. Functional and beautiful, but utterly without warmth. But it was the room at the end of the hall that made her heart ache. Brielle's art studio. The door stood slightly ajar, morning sunlight streaming through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. Mrs. Rivers had been very clear. "Mr. Jack doesn't want anyone going in there. That room stays exactly as Mrs. Brielle left it 7 years ago." But sometimes the door seemed to call to her. She could see easels draped in white cloth, tables covered with untouched art supplies, and canvases turned to face the wall, as if sleeping. A small sound, half sob, half whimper, made Janelle freeze. It was coming from inside the studio. Without hesitation, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. Henry was sitting on the floor in a patch of sunlight, clutching a framed photograph to his chest. His small shoulders shook with silent tears, and when he looked up at Janelle, his green eyes were swimming with pain, too deep for any child to bear alone. "Oh, sweetheart," Janelle whispered, crossing the room in 3 quick steps. She knelt beside him, her heart breaking at his tear-stained face. "What are you doing in here all by yourself?" Henry held up the photograph with trembling hands. It showed a radiant woman with the same green eyes and golden hair as Henry, her belly round with pregnancy, her face glowing with joy. She was standing in this very room, paintbrush in hand, working on a canvas that showed a family of 3 surrounded by sunflowers. "Is this your mama?" Janelle asked softly. Henry nodded, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. He touched the glass over his mother's face with one small finger, so gently, as if afraid he might hurt her. "She's beautiful," Janelle said, settling cross-legged beside him. "And you look just like her. Those eyes, that sweet face. You're your mama's boy through and through." For a moment, they sat together in golden morning light, sharing the weight of grief and love that filled this room like incense. Janelle could feel the presence of the woman who had painted here, dreamed here, prepared for a child she would never hold. "You miss her something fierce, don't you?" Janelle said gently. "Even though you never got to meet her, you miss her." Henry's nod was so small it was almost invisible, but Janelle saw it. "Can I tell you something?" Janelle asked, and Henry's green eyes focused on her with laser intensity. "My grandmother used to say that love doesn't die when someone goes to heaven. She said it grows stronger, like a tree that gets deeper roots. Your mama may not be here to hug you, but her love is all around you, baby boy. It lives right here." She placed her hand gently over his heart, where it lives forever. Henry stared at her for a long moment, and then, to Janelle's complete amazement, he leaned against her side, still clutching his mother's photograph. She wrapped her arms around him carefully and felt his small body relax against hers. "Mama," he whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. Janelle's breath caught in her throat. Did he just— "Mama," Henry said again, his voice like the rustle of leaves, barely there, but unmistakably real. Tears sprang to Janelle's eyes. "Yes, baby, your mama. She loves you so much." Henry tilted his head back to look at her, and there was something different in his expression, a spark of life that hadn't been there before. "Mama, love, Henry." The words came slowly, carefully, as if he was testing a language he'd never been brave enough to speak. "Oh, honey, yes," Janelle whispered fiercely. "Your mama loves you more than all the stars in the sky." And in return, they were healing parts of her heart she hadn't even known were broken. Tomorrow, she would return to continue the work of turning this house back into a home. But tonight, she would fall asleep to the memory of a little boy's voice saying her name for the very first time. "And your daddy loves you too, so much it probably scares him sometimes." Henry considered this, then surprised her by reaching up to touch her face with one small hand. "Mama, Janelle?" The name, spoken in his sweet, rusty voice, hit Janelle like lightning. "What did you say, baby boy?" "Mama Janelle," Henry repeated, clearer this time. "Stay with Henry?" Janelle felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she pulled him into the gentlest hug. "Oh, my sweet, precious boy. Yes, I'll stay with you. As long as you need me, I'll stay." From the hallway came footsteps, Mrs. Rivers arriving. Janelle quickly wiped her eyes and helped Henry carefully place the photograph back where he'd found it. "Should we go see Mrs. Rivers?" Janelle asked softly. Henry nodded and surprised her by taking her hand, his small fingers threading through hers with perfect trust. "There you are, child," Mrs. Rivers said as they appeared at the top of the stairs. She was a plump woman in her 60s with kind eyes and grey hair in a sensible bun. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Time for your mathematics lesson." Henry nodded but didn't let go of Janelle's hand. Mrs. Rivers noticed this unusual behavior, but wisely said nothing. "Will you help me with numbers, Mama Janelle?" Henry asked as they settled at the kitchen table, his voice still soft but growing stronger. Mrs. Rivers nearly dropped the pencil she was arranging. In 15 years of working for the Leo family, she had never heard this child speak, not once. "Henry," she breathed, tears filling her eyes. "You're talking, precious boy. You're really talking." Henry nodded seriously. "Mama Janelle says words are for sharing love. I want to share love." Janelle's heart nearly burst with pride. This beautiful, wise child was choosing to trust not just her, but the world with his voice. They spent the morning working on simple addition problems, with Henry chattering softly about everything from birds outside the window to the way sunlight made patterns on the kitchen floor. His vocabulary was advanced, Years of listening and observing had given him rich internal language that was finally finding its way out. When Jack's car pulled into the driveway at 6:15 that evening, earlier than usual, Janelle was helping Henry set the table. The boy had been talking almost non-stop for hours, making up for 7 years of stored words. "Daddy!" Henry called out as Jack walked through the front door, his small voice echoing through the foyer. "Daddy, come see!" The sound of his son's voice stopped Jack dead. Janelle watched from the kitchen doorway as color drained from his face, as his briefcase slipped from nerveless fingers to hit the marble floor with a sharp crack. "Henry," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. "Did you just—" "Daddy, I can talk now," Henry announced proudly, running to wrap his arms around his father's legs. "Mama Janelle helped me find my words. Listen, Daddy, I love you, I love you, I love you." Jack sank to his knees on the foyer floor, pulling his son into his arms with desperation that spoke of 7 years of hoping for this exact moment. Tears streamed down his face as he held Henry close, this man who had carried the weight of his child's silence like a stone in his chest. "I love you too, buddy," Jack whispered into Henry's golden hair. "God, I love you so much. I've been waiting to hear your voice for your whole life." Over Henry's head, Jack's eyes met Janelle's, and the gratitude and wonder in his expression took her breath away. "How?" Jack asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Mama Janelle says love makes words brave," Henry explained seriously, pulling back to look at his father's tear-stained face. "She says Mama Brielle's love lives in my heart, and your love makes me safe, and her love makes me happy. All that love together made my words want to come out." Jack looked at Janelle again, and she saw something transform in his expression, not just gratitude now, but something deeper and more complicated that made her pulse quicken. "Thank you," he said simply, but the words carried the weight of 7 years of silence finally broken. That night, as Janelle drove home through winding mountain roads, she couldn't stop smiling. Henry's sweet voice kept echoing in her mind. "Mama Janelle," he'd called her, and stay with Henry. The trust and love in those simple words had changed something fundamental in her chest. She was falling in love with this family, not just with Henry, whose courage in finding his voice had moved her to tears, but with Jack too, with the gentle way he held his son, with the wonder in his eyes when Henry spoke, with the quiet strength that had carried him through 7 years of unimaginable challenges. For the first time in her life, Janelle felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She was saving this family, healing their wounds with patience and love. Chapter 3. Shadows and Sunlight. 4 weeks into her mission to heal the Leo family, Janelle discovered that some people were determined to keep broken things broken, and that sometimes love required fighting battles you never chose, against enemies who smiled while they sharpened their knives. The late afternoon sun painted golden stripes across the kitchen floor as Janelle hummed an old gospel tune while preparing Henry's snack. 4 weeks of working at the Leo estate had brought changes that still amazed her. The house that had once felt like a beautiful mausoleum now echoed with the sound of a child's laughter, his constant questions, his sweet voice calling Mama Janelle from various rooms throughout the day. Henry's transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. Not only was he talking regularly now, asking questions, telling stories, even singing little songs he made up, but he'd begun following Janelle around the house like a curious shadow, chattering about everything from butterflies in the garden to the way sunlight made rainbows in the crystal chandelier. "Mama Janelle, look!" Henry burst through the kitchen door, his arms full of wildflowers he'd picked from the meadow behind the house. His green eyes sparkled with excitement, and there was a smudge of dirt on his cheek that made him look like any normal 7-year-old who'd been playing outside. "Oh my goodness," Janelle gasped, setting down the apple she'd been slicing. "Those are the most beautiful flowers I've ever seen. Where did you find them?" "By the big oak tree where the squirrels live," Henry said proudly, climbing onto one of the bar stools. "I picked them for you because you said yellow was your favorite color, and look, these ones are the same color as sunshine." Janelle felt her heart squeeze with love for this sweet, thoughtful child. 4 weeks ago, he hadn't spoken a single word. Now he was creating poetry with natural eloquence. "They're perfect, baby boy," she said, searching the cabinets for a suitable vase. "Should we put them in water so they'll stay pretty?" As she arranged the wildflowers, Henry continued his excited chatter. "Mrs. Rivers says I'm reading better than most kids my age now, and Dr. Caldwell says my communication skills are remarkably advanced for someone who just started talking." He said the big words carefully, clearly proud that he'd remembered them. Janelle paused in her flower arranging. Dr. Adrienne Caldwell was Henry's child psychologist, a compassionate woman in her early 40s who specialized in childhood trauma. She'd been working with Henry since he was 3 years old, and according to Mrs. Rivers, she was astounded by his sudden breakthrough. "What did you tell her?" Janelle asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "I told her about you," Henry said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I told her how you listen with your whole heart, not just your ears, and how you're not scared of sad feelings. You just hold them until they're not so scary anymore." The wisdom in his words made Janelle's throat tight with emotion. This child understood love and healing in ways that most adults never learned. "You're pretty smart, you know that, sweetheart." "Daddy says I get it from Mama Brielle," Henry said, and for the first time in days, his expression grew thoughtful rather than purely happy. "Mama Janelle, do you think Mama Brielle is proud that I'm talking now?" "Oh, baby boy," Janelle said, abandoning the flowers to kneel beside his stool. "I think your mama is so proud of you, she's probably teaching all the angels your name so they can cheer for you too." Henry giggled at the image, his face lighting up with joy. But before he could respond, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house, followed by the sharp clicking of expensive heels on marble. "Jack," a woman's voice called out, crisp and commanding. "Jack, darling, where are you? We need to discuss the Morrison cybersecurity contract." Henry's smile faded instantly, and Janelle felt him move closer to her side. "That's Miss Eliana," he whispered, his voice losing its excited energy. "She comes sometimes for business meetings with Daddy." The kitchen door swung open to reveal a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Eliana Foster was tall and willowy, with perfectly styled blonde hair, flawless makeup, and a designer dress that probably cost more than Janelle made in 3 months. Her smile was bright and sharp, like a knife that had been polished to a gleaming edge. "Henry, darling," Eliana said, but there was something forced about her enthusiasm. "How are you, sweet boy? And who is this?" Her ice-blue gaze shifted to Janelle, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "This is Mama Janelle," Henry said, instinctively moving even closer to Janelle's side. "She takes care of us and helps me with everything." Eliana's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "Mama Janelle? How interesting." She looked Janelle up and down with barely concealed disdain. "I'm Eliana Foster, Jack's business partner at Leo Cybersecurity. And you are?" "Janelle Holt," Janelle replied, standing to her full height and meeting Eliana's gaze steadily. "I work for the cleaning service that maintains the house." "I see." Eliana's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Well, isn't it wonderful that Henry has found someone to attach himself to? Children can be so indiscriminate with their affections, can't they? Especially children who've experienced significant trauma." The subtle cruelty in her words made Janelle's jaw clench, but she kept her expression neutral. Beside her, Henry pressed closer, and she could feel his small body tensing at the undercurrent of hostility. Henry is a remarkable child, Janelle said calmly. Any adult would be honored to earn his trust. Oh, absolutely, Eliana agreed, but her tone suggested the opposite. Though I do hope you understand the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries. After all, you wouldn't want the boy to become confused about your role in his life. It could be quite damaging, psychologically speaking, if he became too attached to someone who's temporary. Before Janelle could respond, Jack's voice echoed from the foyer. Eliana, what are you doing here? I thought our meeting was scheduled for tomorrow. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by, Eliana called back, her voice instantly transforming into something warm and inviting. I hope you don't mind the surprise visit. Jack appeared in the kitchen doorway moments later, loosening his tie as he walked. He looked tired, more tired than usual, and when his gaze found Henry and Janelle standing together near the wildflowers, something in his expression softened. "Daddy!" Henry exclaimed, running to wrap his arms around his father's legs. "Look what I picked for Mama Janelle." He pointed proudly to the vase of wildflowers. "Those are beautiful, buddy," Jack said, ruffling Henry's golden hair. His eyes met Janelle's over his son's head, and she saw something there. Gratitude, warmth, and something else that made her pulse quicken. "Did you thank Miss Holt for helping you arrange them?" "She always helps me with everything," Henry said seriously. "She's the best mama in the whole world, except for Mama Brielle, who's in heaven." An uncomfortable silence filled the kitchen. Eliana's smile became even more strained. Jack looked like he wasn't sure how to respond, and Janelle felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Henry," she said gently, "why don't you go wash your hands for dinner? Mrs. Rivers will be starting soon." "Okay, Mama Janelle," Henry said cheerfully, apparently oblivious to the tension in the room. He hugged Jack's legs once more, then surprised everyone by walking over to give Janelle a quick hug around the waist before skipping out of the kitchen. The moment he was gone, Eliana turned to Jack with an expression of carefully manufactured concern. "Jack, darling, we really need to talk. Privately." Her gaze flicked meaningfully toward Janelle. "Of course," Jack said, but he seemed reluctant. "Miss Holt, thank you for everything today. You can finish up whenever you're ready." Janelle nodded, beginning to gather her cleaning supplies with hands that were steadier than she felt. As she worked, she couldn't help but overhear fragments of conversation from the dining room where Jack and Eliana had retreated. Inappropriate attachment. Setting himself up for another devastating loss. People like that don't understand their place. Think about what's best for Henry. Each phrase felt like a small cut, but it was people like that made Janelle's hands still on the counter. She'd encountered that particular brand of coded prejudice before, the kind that hid behind concern and propriety while delivering its poison with a smile. 20 minutes later, as Janelle was preparing to leave, she heard Eliana's heels clicking toward the front door. Through the kitchen window, she watched the blonde woman air-kiss Jack goodbye, her hand lingering on his arm just a moment too long. "Think about what I said, Jack." Eliana's voice carried clearly through the open window. "That woman may seem helpful now, but she's getting too close. Henry is vulnerable, and he's already calling her Mama. What happens when she decides to leave? What happens when she breaks his heart?" Janelle closed her eyes, Eliana's words echoing in her mind like a cruel prophecy. Was she getting too attached? Was she setting Henry up for another devastating loss? She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Jack's footsteps until he was standing in the kitchen doorway. "Miss Holt? I thought you'd left already." Janelle turned, her heart doing something complicated when she saw the expression on his face. There was conflict there, uncertainty, and something that looked almost like pain. "I was just finishing up," she said quietly, gathering the last of her supplies. They stood in silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows and painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Finally, Jack spoke. About what Eliana said. He began, then stopped, running a hand through his dark hair. She means well. She's just concerned about Henry getting too attached. And what do you think? Janelle asked, meeting his gaze directly. Do you think I'm getting too attached to your son? Jack was quiet for so long that Janelle thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I think, he said carefully, that Henry has been more himself these past few weeks than he's been since he was born. I think whatever you're doing, whatever connection you've made with him, it's helping him heal in ways I never thought possible. Relief flooded through Janelle's chest, but Jack wasn't finished. But I also think, he continued, his blue eyes serious, that Eliana has a point. Henry has already lost one mother. If he gets too attached to you and something happens, if you decide to take another job or move away or... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I understand, Janelle said softly, though every word felt like swallowing glass. You're protecting him. I'm trying to, Jack said, and there was so much pain in his voice that Janelle wanted to reach out and comfort him. I'm trying to protect us both. The weight of his words settled between them like a stone dropped into still water. Janelle understood what he wasn't saying, that he was protecting himself too, that maybe he was starting to care more than was wise, that maybe the connection she felt wasn't entirely one-sided. I should go, she said finally. It's getting late. As she walked toward the door, Jack's voice stopped her. Janelle? She turned back, startled by his use of her first name. In the month she'd been working here, he'd never called her anything but Miss Holt. Thank you, he said simply, for everything you've done for Henry. For us. I needed you to know that. That evening, as storm clouds gathered over the Blue Ridge Mountains, Janelle sat in her small apartment trying to process everything that had happened. She kept replaying Eliana's words, Jack's conflicted expression, and most of all, Henry's innocent declaration that she was the best mama in the whole world. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother Kingston. How's the fancy house job going? You being careful with those rich folks? Janelle stared at the message for a long time before typing back, It's more complicated than I expected. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Janelle found herself thinking about the look in Jack's eyes when he'd thanked her. Grateful, conflicted, and something else that made her heart race despite her better judgment. She was falling in love with both the broken man and his healing son, and that loving them might be the most dangerous thing she'd ever done. Chapter 4. The Weight of Memory. 6 weeks into her mission to heal the Leo family, Janelle discovered that sometimes the most powerful medicine wasn't found in bottles or prescriptions. It was found in the courage to open locked doors, face buried grief, and prove that love could transform even the deepest wounds into sources of strength. The morning sun streamed through the dining room windows as Janelle set down a plate of homemade blueberry pancakes in front of Henry, who was chattering excitedly about the monarch butterfly he'd seen in the garden. These family breakfast moments had become precious to her. What had started as simple meal preparation had evolved into the most important part of her day. It was orange and black with the most beautiful wings, Henry said, cutting his pancakes into precise squares. Mrs. Rivers says it's called a monarch, and they fly all the way to Mexico for winter. Can you imagine flying that far, Mama Janelle? That's incredible, sweetheart, Janelle said, pouring coffee. Your Mama Brielle would have loved to paint something like that. She thought butterflies were magical. Henry nodded seriously. Daddy told me Mama Brielle painted butterflies all the time. He said she thought they were like pieces of heaven that came to visit Earth. Footsteps in the hallway made them both look up. To Janelle's surprise, Jack appeared in the doorway, still wearing pajama pants and a rumpled t-shirt instead of his usual business attire. His dark hair was mussed from sleep, and there was something vulnerable about seeing him so unguarded that made Janelle's pulse quicken. "Daddy!" Henry exclaimed, his face lighting up. "You're home. Are you sick?" "No, buddy, I'm not sick," Jack said, ruffling his son's hair. "I decided to work from home today. Thought maybe I could spend some time with my favorite person." Henry beamed, and Janelle felt her heart do something complicated at Jack's gentle smile. In 6 weeks of working here, she'd rarely seen him during the day. He left early and came home late, like a ghost haunting his own house. "Would you like some pancakes?" Janelle offered, starting to stand. "I made plenty." "I don't want to intrude," Jack said, but there was hope flickering in his blue eyes. "You're not intruding," Henry said firmly. "This is your house, Daddy, and Mama Janelle makes the best pancakes in the whole world." As they settled into an impromptu family breakfast, Janelle noticed how different Jack seemed when relaxed. The tension lines around his eyes were softer, his shoulders less rigid, and when Henry told one of his elaborate stories about dinosaur adventures, Jack actually laughed, a real, genuine sound that transformed his entire face. "Daddy," Henry said suddenly, his fork pausing, "do you remember when Mama Brielle painted the butterfly picture?" Jack's smile faltered slightly, and Janelle saw his protective walls start to rise. "Henry, we don't need to." "I want to know," Henry said with determined persistence. "Dr. Caldwell says it's good to talk about people we love, even if they're in heaven. She says it keeps their love alive in our hearts." Jack glanced at Janelle, and she could see the conflict in his blue eyes, the desire to protect himself from painful memories warring with his love for his son and his growing trust in her judgment. "Dr. Caldwell is right," Janelle said gently. "Talking about the people we love is one of the most beautiful ways to honor their memory." For a long moment Jack was quiet, staring down at his coffee cup as if it might hold answers to life's most difficult questions. Finally, he looked up at Henry with an expression so tender it made Janelle's chest tight. "Your mama painted that butterfly picture when she was about 6 months pregnant with you," Jack said softly. "She was sitting in the garden one afternoon, and this monarch butterfly landed right on her belly where you were growing. She got so excited, she came running inside to get her paints, saying it was a sign that you were going to be something very special." Henry's eyes went wide with wonder. "It landed on me." "On Mama's belly where you were safe and warm," Jack corrected with a small smile. "She said the butterfly was saying hello to you. She painted that picture the same day and hung it in your nursery before you were born." "Can we go see it?" Henry asked eagerly. "Can we go look at Mama Brielle's paintings?" "I want to see what she made." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Janelle knew that Jack had kept Brielle's art studio exactly as it was the day she died, a shrine to lost love that he avoided like it contained actual physical pain. "Henry," Jack began carefully, "maybe that's not such a good idea." "Please, Daddy." Henry's green eyes were bright with curiosity and longing. "I want to see what Mama made. I want to know about her." Jack looked helplessly at Janelle, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes. How do you explain to a child that some rooms hold too much love and loss to bear? "Maybe," Janelle said carefully, "we could all go together. Sometimes scary things become easier when you're not facing them alone." Jack stared at her for a long moment, weighing the cost of opening that door against the benefit to his son, and perhaps to himself. Finally, slowly, he nodded. "Okay, but just for a little while." The walk to Brielle's studio felt like approaching sacred ground. Jack's face had gone pale, and his hands were clenched into fists. Henry skipped ahead excitedly, oblivious to his father's distress, chattering about all the beautiful things he hoped to see. When Jack opened the studio door, sunlight flooded the space. illuminating a room exactly as Brielle had left it 7 years ago. Easels held canvases at various stages of completion, pallets of dried paint sat on tables like forgotten rainbows, and brushes stood in jars like soldiers waiting for orders that would never come. But it was the paintings themselves that took Janelle's breath away. Brielle Leo had been extraordinarily gifted. The walls were covered with canvases that seemed to pulse with life, landscapes that made you feel the wind, portraits that captured souls rather than just faces, and everywhere, flowers and butterflies rendered with such love and detail that they seemed ready to take flight. "Wow," Henry whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Mama made all of this." Jack nodded, but remained frozen in the doorway, unable to fully enter the room. Pain radiated from him like heat, and Janelle's heart broke for this man who had been carrying his grief alone for so long. "She was incredibly talented," Janelle said softly, walking slowly around the room. "Look at this one, Henry. Is this the butterfly painting your daddy was telling you about?" Henry ran to the canvas she indicated, a beautiful piece showing a pregnant woman in a garden, her face glowing with joy as a monarch butterfly rested delicately on her rounded belly. The woman had Henry's stunning green eyes and golden hair, and her expression radiated pure love and anticipation. "That's Mama," Henry breathed, reaching out to touch the canvas gently. "She's so pretty, and look, there I am." He pointed to the butterfly with wonder. "I was already friends with butterflies before I was even born." Janelle's attention was caught by another painting nearby, this one showing a family of 3, a man who was clearly Jack, a woman who was obviously Brielle, and between them, a small child with green eyes and golden curls. They were standing in a field of sunflowers, their faces radiating happiness and hope. "She painted her dreams," Jack said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. He had finally stepped into the room and was standing beside Janelle, looking at the family portrait. "She used to say that painting was like praying with colors, that she could paint the life she wanted and somehow make it more real." "Daddy," Henry said, tugging on Jack's hand, "why are you crying?" Jack seemed surprised by his tears, as if he hadn't realized they were falling. "Because I miss her, buddy, because I loved your mama so much, and sometimes it still hurts that she's not here with us." "But she is here," Henry said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children possessed. "She's in all these beautiful pictures, and she's in me because I have her eyes, and she's in you because you loved her. Mrs. Rivers says, love doesn't disappear just because people go to heaven." Jack pulled his son into a fierce hug, and over Henry's head his eyes met Janelle's. The gratitude and pain, and something deeper than both, were so clear in his expression that tears sprang to her own eyes. "Your mama would be so proud of you," Jack whispered into Henry's hair, "so incredibly proud of the amazing boy you're becoming." They spent another hour in the studio, with Henry asking questions about every painting and Jack slowly opening up, sharing memories that he'd kept locked away for years. Janelle mostly listened, occasionally asking gentle questions that drew out more stories, and gradually she watched Jack's pain transform into something else. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of peaceful acceptance. As they prepared to leave, Henry stopped in front of a small canvas that had been turned to face the wall. "What's this one, Daddy?" Jack turned the canvas around, and Janelle's breath caught. It was a self-portrait of Brielle, but not just any self-portrait. She had painted herself as an angel, with wings that seemed to shimmer with their own light, and in her arms she held a baby, Henry, while behind her stood Jack, his hand resting lovingly on her shoulder. At the bottom of the canvas, in Brielle's delicate handwriting, were the words, "Love never dies, it just learns to fly." The silence that followed was profound and holy, broken only by Henry's small voice. "She knew," he whispered. "Mama knew she was going to become an angel, but she painted it so we wouldn't be too sad." Jack let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and sank into a chair that had been covered with a dust cloth. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to be everything she would have been for you. I don't know how to fill that space in your life where a mother should be." Henry walked over to his father with the serene confidence of a child who knew he was unconditionally loved, climbed into his lap, and wrapped his small arms around Jack's neck. "You don't have to fill it, Daddy," Henry said gently. "That space is for Mama Brielle, and it's perfect just the way it is. You have your own space in my heart, and it's perfect too." Then, to Janelle's amazement, Henry looked over at her with those luminous green eyes. "And Mama Janelle has her own space too," he said simply. "There's room for everybody who loves me." Jack's gaze found Janelle's across the room, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition, a connection that went deeper than words. She saw the man behind the grief, the father behind the fear, and the quiet strength that had carried him through 7 years of unimaginable loss. And maybe, just maybe, he saw her too, not just as the woman who cleaned his house or even the woman who had helped his son find his voice, but as someone who understood that love didn't diminish when it was shared. It multiplied. As they closed the studio door behind them, Janelle realized that something fundamental had shifted. They weren't just employer and employee anymore, or even friends. They were 3 people who had found each other in the aftermath of loss and were slowly, carefully learning to build something new together, something that looked remarkably like a family. Chapter 5. Lines We Don't Cross. 8 weeks into her mission to heal the Leo family, Janelle discovered that the most dangerous territory wasn't marked by fences or warning signs. It was marked by lingering glances, stolen moments, and the terrifying realization that saving others sometimes meant risking your own heart in ways you never anticipated. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold as Janelle knelt in the garden beside Henry, their hands deep in the rich Virginia soil as they planted the sunflower seeds he'd been so excited about. 8 weeks of working at the Leo estate had brought changes that still amazed her daily, not just in Henry, who now chatted constantly and laughed with pure joy, but in the very atmosphere of the house itself. What had once felt like a beautiful mausoleum now hummed with life. Henry's artwork hung on the refrigerator, his toys were scattered in the living room instead of locked away, and most remarkably, Jack had begun joining them for lunch several times a week, actually engaging in conversation instead of hiding behind work and grief. "Mama Janelle, do you think they'll grow as tall as me?" Henry asked, carefully placing another seed in the hole they dug together. His hands were covered in dirt, and there was a smudge of soil on his cheek. "Taller," Janelle promised, brushing earth from his golden hair. "Much taller. Sunflowers can grow 8 feet high or more. You'll have to crane your neck just to see the tops." 8 feet. Henry's green eyes went wide with wonder. "That's like real giants. Can we plant a whole field of them next year?" The words slipped out before Janelle could stop them. Next year, as if she would still be here, as if this was more than just a job, as if she was planning a future in this place that had somehow become home. "Will you still be here next year?" Henry asked with the directness that only children possessed. "Will you still be taking care of us?" Before Janelle could navigate that dangerous question, Jack's voice came from behind them. "What are my 2 favorite gardeners up to?" Janelle's heart did that complicated flutter it had been doing lately whenever Jack appeared unexpectedly. He'd changed from his business clothes into jeans and a soft grey sweater that brought out the blue in his eyes, and his dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his fingers through it, a habit she'd noticed when he was thinking deeply about something. "Daddy!" Henry scrambled to his feet, dirt covering his small hands and knees. "We're planting sunflowers. Mama Janelle says they'll grow taller than giants." "Giants, huh?" Jack's smile was warm as he looked down at his son, but when his gaze shifted to Janelle, still kneeling in the garden dirt, something changed in his expression, something that made her pulse quicken and her mouth go dry. "That sounds amazing, buddy. Mind if I help?" For the next hour, the three of them worked together in comfortable harmony, broken only by Henry's excited chatter and occasional questions. But Janelle was acutely aware of Jack's presence beside her, the way his fingers brushed hers when they reached for the same packet of seeds, the warmth of his shoulder when he leaned close to show Henry proper planting techniques, the way he smelled like expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him that made her want to breathe deeper. When Henry ran inside to wash his hands and show Mrs. Rivers the dirt under his fingernails, Janelle found herself alone in the garden with Jack for the first time since that day in Brielle's studio. The silence stretched between them, charged with something that made the hair on her arms stand up despite the warm afternoon. "He's happy," Jack said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "I haven't seen him this happy since, well, maybe ever." "He's a wonderful child," Janelle replied, brushing soil from her palms. "You should be proud of who he's becoming." "I am," Jack said, and when she looked up, he was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But I think his happiness has more to do with you than with me." The words hung between them like a confession, and Janelle felt something shift in the air around them. They were standing close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, could count the faint lines that spoke of years spent carrying too much responsibility alone. "Jack," she said softly, but she wasn't sure what she meant to say next. "I know," he said, and his voice was rough around the edges. "I know we shouldn't. I know this is complicated." But even as he said it, he took a step closer, and Janelle found herself caught between the desire to run and the overwhelming urge to close the distance between them completely. "Janelle," he said, and her name sounded different on his lips, not the careful Miss Holt he usually used, but something intimate and warm that made her heart race. For a moment, that lasted an eternity, they stood there in the golden afternoon light, the scent of honeysuckle and fresh earth surrounding them, the weight of everything unspoken pressing down like the promise of rain. Jack's hand lifted slightly, as if he was going to touch her face, and Janelle felt herself leaning toward him like a flower seeking sunlight. The sharp ring of Jack's cell phone shattered the moment like glass. They sprang apart as if they'd been caught doing something wrong, which, Janelle supposed, they had been. Jack pulled out his phone with hands that weren't quite steady, and Janelle busied herself gathering the empty seed packets while trying to calm her racing heart. "Eliana," Jack said into the phone, his voice carefully controlled, "what can I do for you?" Janelle couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Jack's expression grow tense as he listened. "No, that's not convenient," he said firmly. "I'm spending time with my family today." There was a pause, then Jack's jaw tightened. "Fine, but just for a few minutes. And Eliana, in the future, please call before showing up unannounced." He ended the call and turned to Janelle with an expression that mixed regret and frustration. "Eliana's coming by to discuss some urgent business matter. She'll be here in 10 minutes. "I should go," Janelle said quickly, gathering the gardening tools. "I finished everything for today anyway." "You don't have to leave because of her," Jack said. But there was something defeated in his voice that suggested he knew exactly why Janelle was uncomfortable. 20 minutes later, as Janelle was putting away the last of the gardening supplies in the garage, she heard Eliana's voice drifting from Jack's study. The door was open, and sound carried clearly down the hallway. "I'm telling you this as your friend and business partner, Jack," Eliana was saying, her voice sharp with false concern. "People are starting to talk. That woman, Janelle, she's getting entirely too comfortable here, and Henry's attachment to her is becoming problematic." "What do you mean, problematic?" Jack's voice was carefully neutral, but Janelle could hear the underlying tension. "Kingston Holt called our office today," Eliana said, and Janelle's blood ran cold. Kingston was her older brother, fiercely protective and sometimes quick to anger when he thought someone was taking advantage of his sister. Apparently he's been asking questions about this family, about whether his sister is being treated appropriately. He seemed to think there might be something improper happening here. Janelle closed her eyes, her heart sinking. Kingston had been suspicious of this job from the beginning, worried about her working for a wealthy white family, concerned about power dynamics and potential for exploitation. If he was making calls to Jack's business. "There's nothing improper happening," Jack said firmly, but even from the hallway, Janelle could hear doubt creeping into his voice. "Of course not," Eliana agreed sweetly, "but appearances matter, Jack. The appearance of a widowed tech mogul becoming too close to his black cleaning lady? Well, you can imagine what people are saying, what they're already whispering at the country club." The racial undertone was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep while maintaining plausible deniability. Janelle felt sick to her stomach. "And then there's Henry to consider," Eliana continued, pressing her advantage. "That child has already lost one mother. Do you really want to risk his emotional stability by allowing him to become attached to someone who's ultimately temporary? What happens when Janelle decides to move on? What happens when she starts her own family and doesn't have time for yours anymore?" "Perhaps," Jack said finally, and each word felt like a nail in a coffin. "You have a point. Perhaps it would be better to maintain clearer professional boundaries." Janelle had heard enough. Moving as quietly as possible, she slipped out the back door and walked to her car, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she drove away from the Leo estate, Eliana's words echoed in her mind like a cruel prophecy. People are starting to talk. Ultimately temporary. What people are already whispering. That night, as Janelle sat in her small apartment trying to process everything that had happened, her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Serenity. "Girl, you've been talking about that little boy and his daddy nonstop for 2 months. When are you going to admit you're catching feelings?" Janelle stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "It's not that simple." "It never is," came Serenity's immediate reply. "But sometimes the best things in life are the most complicated ones. Question is, are you going to fight for what you want or let other people decide what you deserve?" As Janelle lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the moment in the garden when Jack had almost touched her face, she couldn't shake Eliana's words. What was she doing? What was she hoping for? A fairy tale ending where the tech millionaire fell in love with the cleaning lady and they all lived happily ever after. Real life didn't work that way. Real life had obstacles like race and class and social expectations. Real life had people like Eliana Foster who would make sure that women like Janelle stayed exactly where society thought they belonged. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, Janelle couldn't stop thinking about the way Jack had said her name in the garden, or the way Henry's hand felt in hers, or the way it had felt for just a moment, like they were a real family. Even if it was just a fantasy, it had been the most beautiful fantasy she'd ever lived. And maybe, just maybe, some fantasies were worth fighting for. Chapter 6. When Hearts Collide. 10 weeks into her mission to heal the Leo family, Janelle discovered that love arrived not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty, and that sometimes the most dangerous moment was when you realized you'd already fallen too deep to ever find your way back. The morning of Henry's family picnic dawned crisp and clear, with autumn painting the Blue Ridge Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. It had been Henry's idea, a family adventure in the meadow behind the house. And though Janelle had initially protested that she was just the housekeeper, both Henry and Mrs. Rivers had insisted she join them. "That boy hasn't asked for much in his 7 years," Mrs. Rivers had said with gentle firmness. "If he wants a picnic with his people, then his people better show up." His people. The phrase stuck with Janelle as she packed sandwiches, as she helped Henry choose which toy dinosaurs to bring, as she watched Jack emerge from the house in jeans and a cable-knit sweater that made him look younger and more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. Now, spread on a blanket beneath the ancient oak tree, Janelle felt something she'd never expected, like she truly belonged somewhere. Henry was in his element, racing between them, with arms spread like airplane wings, his laughter echoing across the meadow. He'd convinced Jack to join his elaborate game involving dinosaurs, space travel, and saving the world from evil vegetables. Watching Jack crawl on hands and knees, making dramatic sound effects, while Henry directed with gleeful authority, Janelle felt her heart do something dangerous and irreversible. She was falling in love with him, not just attraction, but something deeper. Love for the gentleness in his hands when he helped Henry with difficult tasks. Love for the man who had carried grief for 7 years, but was slowly letting light back in. "Daddy," Henry said during their picnic lunch, "do you think Mama Brielle would like Mama Janelle?" The question should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. Jack considered it seriously, the way he considered all of Henry's important questions. "I think," Jack said slowly, "that your mama would love anyone who made you this happy, and anyone who helped you remember that it's okay to love new people without forgetting the people we've lost." Henry nodded solemnly, then brightened. "So they would be friends?" "The best of friends," Jack agreed. And when his eyes met Janelle's over Henry's head, she saw something that looked dangerously like love. They spent the rest of the afternoon in perfect harmony, Henry exploring every inch of the meadow, while Jack and Janelle talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Janelle learned that Jack had wanted to be a teacher too, before his father's expectations steered him toward business. Jack learned that Janelle wrote poetry in her spare time, that she'd always dreamed of traveling to Ireland to see the countryside her grandmother had described. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they packed up their picnic supplies while Henry chased fireflies that were just beginning to wink in the gathering dusk. "Thank you," Jack said quietly as they folded the blanket together, their hands brushing as they worked. "For today, for everything. I can't remember the last time I felt this." "Peaceful?" Janelle suggested. "Happy," Jack corrected, and the word hung between them like a gift. They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, Henry skipping ahead of them, chattering about the best day ever and already making plans for their next adventure. As they reached the front steps, Janelle realized she didn't want the day to end, didn't want to return to the careful boundaries they'd been maintaining. "I should help clean up," she said, though Mrs. Rivers had already gone home, and there was really nothing that couldn't wait until morning. "You don't need to," Jack said, but there was something hopeful in his voice that suggested he didn't want the day to end either. In the kitchen, they worked side by side, washing the picnic dishes, their conversation flowing as easily as it had all afternoon. When Jack reached around her to put a plate in the cabinet above the sink, Janelle found herself trapped between his body and the counter, close enough to feel his warmth, to catch his scent. "Janelle," he said softly, and when she turned, they were standing so close she could see gold flecks in his blue eyes. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just them. The way he looked at her like she was precious and necessary. The way her heart beat so hard she was sure he could hear it. Jack's hand lifted to touch her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I shouldn't want this," he whispered. "I shouldn't want you." "But you do," Janelle said, not a question. "God help me, yes." He was leaning closer. She was rising to meet him and, "Daddy?" "Mama Janelle." "Are you in the kitchen?" Henry's voice made them spring apart. Jack ran a hand through his hair, while Janelle busied herself with already dry dishes. "We're here, buddy," Jack called, his voice only slightly strained, "just finishing up." Henry appeared in the doorway, now in his pajamas and carrying his favorite stuffed dinosaur. Mrs. Rivers says I need to brush my teeth, but I wanted to say thank you for the best picnic ever first. He hugged Janelle first, his small arms wrapping around her waist with fierce affection. I love you, Mama Janelle, he whispered against her shirt. I love you too, sweet boy, she whispered back, meaning it more than she'd ever meant anything. Then Henry hugged his father, and over his son's head, Jack's eyes found Janelle's again. The moment from earlier was gone, interrupted and unfinished, but the weight of what had almost happened hung between them like a promise and a threat. As Janelle gathered her things to leave, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Jack had looked at her, the way he'd touched her face like she was something precious. But she also couldn't stop thinking about Eliana's words from the week before, about the reality of their different worlds. At the front door, Jack caught her hand gently. Janelle, about what almost happened. I know it's complicated, she said quietly. It doesn't change how I feel, he said, making her heart skip. But I need to think about Henry, about what's best for him. Of course, he has to come first. As she drove home through the winding mountain roads, Janelle's phone buzzed with a text from Kingston. Need to talk. Important. Call me. But she was too lost in the memory of Jack's hand on her face, the way he'd said her name like a prayer, the terrifying and wonderful realization that she wasn't the only one falling. She was in love with Jack Leo, and unless she was completely misreading the signs, he was falling in love with her too. The question was, what were they going to do about it? That night, as she lay in bed replaying every moment of the perfect afternoon, Janelle thought about Henry's innocent question about whether Mama Brielle would like her. The child's acceptance of love as something that could expand rather than replace gave her hope. But she also thought about the obstacles they faced, the whispers Eliana had mentioned, the social expectations, the fact that she was the cleaning lady and he was the millionaire tech mogul. Some fairy tales, she knew, didn't have happy endings in the real world. Yet, as she drifted off to sleep, Janelle couldn't shake the feeling that what they'd found together was worth fighting for. Henry was thriving, Jack was healing, and she, for the first time in her life, felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Maybe fairy tales weren't about perfect circumstances. Maybe they were about imperfect people choosing to love each other despite the obstacles. Maybe this was just the beginning of their story, not the end. The sunflowers they'd planted would bloom in the spring, reaching toward the sun with the same hope that was slowly growing in Janelle's heart. Love, she was learning, was like those seeds, planted in faith, nurtured with patience, and destined to grow into something beautiful if given the chance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new doubts, new reasons why this couldn't work. But tonight, Janelle would fall asleep, holding on to the memory of Jack's almost kiss and the certainty that some loves were worth any risk. Even if the whole world thought they were wrong, her heart knew they were right. Chapter 7. The Price of Letting Go. 12 weeks into what she had believed was her mission to heal the Leo family, Janelle discovered that sometimes love meant walking away from the very people who needed you most, and that the most devastating goodbyes were the ones that felt like betraying your own heart. The morning after the almost kiss in the kitchen, Janelle arrived at the Leo estate, with her heart still racing from the memory of Jack's touch and the weight of Kingston's urgent text message that she still hadn't returned. But the moment she walked through the front door, she knew something fundamental had changed. Jack was waiting for her in the foyer, dressed in a perfectly pressed business suit, his face carefully composed in the professional mask she hadn't seen in weeks. The warmth from yesterday was gone, replaced by the kind of polite distance that felt like a physical slap. "Miss Holt," he said formally, and the return to her last name made her stomach drop. "I was hoping we could speak privately before you begin your work today." "Of course," Janelle managed, following him into his study with legs that felt suddenly unsteady. Jack closed the door behind them and moved to stand behind his massive oak desk, a deliberate barrier that hadn't been there during any of their previous conversations in this room. His blue eyes were carefully neutral, businesslike, and Janelle felt something cold and final settle in her chest. "About yesterday evening," Jack began, his voice controlled and measured. "I want to apologize for what almost happened in the kitchen. It was inappropriate and unprofessional, and I take full responsibility for crossing boundaries that should never have been crossed." Each word felt like a physical blow. "Jack, I think it would be best," he continued, cutting her off gently but firmly, "if we maintained clearer boundaries going forward. You're excellent at your job, and Henry is obviously very fond of you, but we cannot blur the lines between professional and personal relationships. It's not fair to any of us, especially Henry." Janelle stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the man who had touched her cheek so tenderly the night before. But that man was nowhere to be found. "I see," she said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. "And if I find it difficult to maintain those boundaries?" Something flickered in Jack's eyes. Pain, regret, something that looked almost like desperation. But it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Then perhaps," he said carefully, "it would be better for everyone if we explored other arrangements." The threat was clear, even delivered in his polite, measured tone. Maintain professional distance or lose this job, lose Henry, lose everything she'd come to care about in this house. "I understand," Janelle said, lifting her chin with the dignity her grandmother had taught her. "Crystal clear, Mr. Leo." For the next 2 weeks, they maintained the boundaries Jack had requested with painful precision. Janelle arrived each morning, completed her work efficiently, and left each evening without the long conversations, shared meals, or easy intimacy that had become so natural between them. When Henry asked why she couldn't stay for lunch anymore, she made excuses about scheduling and other commitments, watching his face fall with each rejected invitation. Jack became a ghost again, leaving early and returning late, avoiding the common areas when Janelle was working. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but distant, treating her with the same professional courtesy he might show any service provider. But it was Henry who paid the highest price for their careful boundaries. The little boy who had blossomed under Janelle's attention began to wilt like a flower deprived of sunlight. His chatter became less frequent, his smiles more forced. He still followed Janelle around the house, but quietly now, watching her with those perceptive green eyes that seemed to understand far more than any 7-year-old should have to. "Mama Janelle," he said one afternoon, tugging on her shirt as she cleaned the living room with mechanical efficiency, "are you mad at me?" Janelle's heart broke a little more. She knelt down to his level, fighting back tears that seemed to live just behind her eyes these days. "Oh, sweetheart, no. Why would you think that?" "Because you don't eat lunch with me anymore," Henry said, his lower lip trembling. "And you don't stay to help me with my reading. And Daddy doesn't smile when you're here anymore. Did I do something wrong?" "You didn't do anything wrong, baby boy," Janelle said fiercely, pulling him into a gentle hug. "Not ever. You are perfect and wonderful and the best little boy in the entire world. Sometimes grown-ups have to make changes, even when they don't want to. But I don't want changes," Henry said, and now he was crying in earnest. "I want things to be like they were before. I want you to be happy here. I want Daddy to smile again." "I am happy here," Janelle lied, holding him while her heart shattered. "Being with you makes me happy." But even as she held him, Janelle knew she was failing him. The careful distance she was maintaining to protect everyone's feelings was hurting the one person she'd sworn to help heal. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon when Janelle arrived to find Mrs. Rivers waiting for her with a grim expression and worry lines etched deep around her kind eyes. "That boy has locked himself in his mother's art studio again," Mrs. Rivers said without preamble. "Third time this week. Won't come out, won't talk to me or his father. just sits in there clutching that photograph of his mama and crying silent tears that break my old heart. Janelle's blood ran cold. How long has he been in there? Since this morning. Mr. Jack tried to coax him out before he left for work, but Henry just curled up tighter in that window seat and turned his face to the wall. He's been asking for you, child. Keeps saying, Mama Janelle, over and over, but when I tell him you're coming later, he just shakes his head like he doesn't believe me. Without hesitation, Janelle climbed the stairs to Brielle's studio, 2 at a time. The door was closed, but she could hear soft sniffling from inside, the kind of heartbroken sounds that no child should ever have to make alone. Henry? She called gently, knocking on the door. It's Mama Janelle. Can I come in, sweetheart? The sniffling stopped, followed by the sound of small feet running across the floor. The door opened to reveal Henry, his face streaked with tears, still clutching the photograph of his mother. Mama Janelle, he sobbed, throwing himself into her arms with the desperation of a drowning person reaching for a life preserver. I thought you weren't coming back. I thought you left me like Mama Brielle did. Janelle's heart shattered completely. She carried Henry to the window seat and held him while he cried out all the fear and confusion he'd been carrying. I'm here, she whispered into his golden hair. I'm right here, my sweet boy. But for how long? Henry asked, pulling back to look at her with those devastatingly perceptive green eyes. Daddy's sad again, and you don't smile anymore. And Mrs. Rivers says sometimes people leave, even when they don't want to, because grown-up life is complicated. How could she explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes love meant sacrifice? That sometimes protecting someone meant hurting them? Henry, she said carefully, what if I told you that I might need to find a different job soon? What would you think about that? The color drained from his small face. You can't leave, he whispered. You can't leave me too. Please don't leave me like Mama Brielle did. But what if staying is making things hard for everyone? What if it's better for you and Daddy if I go away? I don't care if it's hard, Henry said fiercely, with a passion that reminded her painfully of his father. Hard things are still good if they're made of love. I need you, Mama Janelle, and Daddy needs you too, even if he's too scared to say it anymore. The wisdom in his words was devastating. This child understood something about love and loss that most adults never learned, that love was worth fighting for, even when it was complicated, even when it was scary. That evening, as Janelle prepared to leave, she found a note tucked into her purse, Henry's carefully printed handwriting on paper torn from his art pad. Dear Mama Janelle, please don't leave us. I know grown-ups think love is complicated, but it's not. Love is when you want someone to stay forever, and they want to stay too. I love you forever and always. Your son, Henry. Janelle read the note 3 times, tears streaming down her face. When she looked up, Jack was standing in the kitchen doorway. His business mask finally slipped to reveal the pain he'd been hiding for 2 weeks. He wrote you a letter, Jack said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. Yes. What did it say? Janelle handed him the note with trembling fingers, watching as he read it. She saw his jaw clench, saw his hands shake slightly as he folded the paper with infinite care. Janelle, he said, her name rough with everything he'd been holding back. I can't keep doing this. Watching Henry fall apart. Watching you pull away from us. Pretending that I don't. He stopped, running both hands through his hair in frustration. Pretending you don't what? She asked softly, though her heart was already breaking because she could see where this was going. Jack looked at her then, really looked at her, and all the careful distance he'd been maintaining crumbled. Pretending I don't love you, he said simply. Pretending that I don't want to build a life with you and Henry more than I want my next breath. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. But, Janelle prompted, because she could hear the unspoken but in his voice. "But I'm scared," Jack admitted, the words seeming to cost him everything. "Scared of what people will say. Scared of how this affects Henry if it doesn't work out. Scared that I'm being selfish by wanting something I have no right to want." Janelle stepped closer, her heart breaking for this man who carried so much responsibility, so much fear of making the wrong choice. "What if," she said carefully, "what if I made the choice for both of us?" Jack's eyes widened with something that looked like panic. "What do you mean?" "I'll give my notice tomorrow," Janelle said, the words tearing at her throat like broken glass. "I'll find another job, somewhere far enough away that we won't run into each other accidentally. Henry will be hurt for a while, but children are resilient. He'll heal, and eventually he'll forget about me." "No," Jack said immediately, stepping toward her with desperation written across his features. "No, that's not what I want." "But it's what's best," Janelle said, backing away from him before she lost her courage entirely. "For all of us. You said it yourself, we can't blur the lines between professional and personal, and maybe you're right." She gathered her purse and headed for the door before Jack could respond, before she could change her mind, before she could let herself believe that love was ever enough to overcome the obstacles that society put between people like her and people like him. That night, as she sat in her apartment staring at her laptop screen and a half-written resignation letter, Janelle's phone rang. Kingston's name appeared on the caller ID, and she finally answered the call she'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. "Nell," her brother's voice was tight with urgency and concern. "We need to talk. Now, there are things about your employer you need to know, things that could change everything." But as Janelle listened to Kingston's urgent tone, all she could think about was Henry's tear-stained face and Jack's broken confession that he loved her. Tomorrow, she would submit her resignation. Tomorrow, she would walk away from the only place that had ever felt like home. Tonight, she would allow herself to grieve for the family she was choosing to leave behind. Chapter 8. When the Heart Remembers. 14 weeks after first walking into the Leo estate, Janelle learned that some truths arrived like lightning, sudden, blinding, and powerful enough to illuminate everything you thought you knew about love, sacrifice, and the courage it takes to fight for what matters most. The Bright Futures Community Center felt like a different world from the Leo estate. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in unflattering white as Janelle knelt beside 7-year-old Marcus, helping him sound out words from a worn reading book. But every time she looked at his dark curls and concentrated expression, all she could see was Henry, golden hair catching sunlight, green eyes bright with excitement as he discovered new words. "Miss Holt, you look sad again," Marcus said, his small hand touching her arm with the intuitive kindness that children possessed. Janelle forced a smile, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Sometimes grown-ups get sad, sweetie, but it's not your fault. You're doing such a good job with your reading." 2 weeks had passed since she'd submitted her resignation letter, 2 weeks since she'd walked away from the only place that had ever felt like home. Mrs. Rivers had called repeatedly, begging her to reconsider. Dr. Caldwell had left voicemails expressing grave concern about Henry's psychological state. Even Serenity questioned her decision daily. But it was Jack's silence that cut deepest and confirmed she'd made the right choice. No desperate phone calls, no text messages pleading for her return, no attempts to change her mind. Just a formal acceptance letter delivered by his assistant and her final paycheck, processed with cold efficiency. Her phone vibrated against the table, another text from Kingston that she'd been ignoring for days. "Nell, I've discovered something about Jack Leo that changes everything. You need to call me now." Whatever her brother had found could only make the situation worse. She was barely holding herself together as it was, throwing herself into work at the community center to avoid thinking about the family she'd abandoned. "Miss Holt?" Mrs. Rodriguez, the center director, appeared at her classroom door with an expression of barely contained excitement. "There's someone here to see you. In my office." Janelle's heart stuttered. Through the glass partition that separated her classroom from the main office, she could see a tall figure in jeans and a navy sweater, his back turned as he spoke with Mrs. Rodriguez's assistant. Something about his posture, the set of his broad shoulders, the way he ran agitated fingers through dark hair, was achingly familiar. When the man turned slightly, Janelle's breath caught in her throat. Jack Leo stood in the community center office, looking nothing like the polished businessman she knew. Dark circles shadowed his blue eyes, his usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there was a desperate quality to his movements that made her chest tight with concern she had no right to feel. "I'll be right back, Marcus," she managed, her voice barely steady. "Keep practicing those sight words." Her legs felt unsteady as she walked toward the office, each step bringing her closer to the man she'd been trying so hard to forget. Jack turned when she entered, and the raw pain in his expression nearly brought her to her knees. "Hello, Janelle," he said quietly, his voice rougher than she remembered. "Jack." Her own voice came out as a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Mrs. Rodriguez discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone in the small office. Jack closed the door behind her and leaned against it, as if he needed the support to remain standing. "Henry stopped talking," he said without preamble, the words hitting her like physical blows. "3 days after you left, complete withdrawal. Won't eat, won't sleep, won't respond to anyone. Dr. Caldwell says it's worse than when Brielle died because this time he understood what he was losing." Janelle's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Oh God, no!" "He writes you letters," Jack continued, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "Every single day. Letters he knows he can't send because he doesn't know where you live." With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper, revealing Henry's careful 7-year-old handwriting. "Dear Mama Janelle, I dreamed you came back and we planted sunflowers together. When I woke up, I ran to the kitchen to tell you about my dream, but then I remembered you were gone. Daddy says you're safe and happy somewhere else, but I think he's lying because I hear him crying at night. Please come home. We need you. Love, Henry." Tears streamed down Janelle's face as she read her son's, Henry's, heartbroken words. "Jack, I ended my partnership with Eliana," Jack said abruptly, cutting off her response. "The day after you left, I finally realized what she'd been doing, manipulating me, spreading poison about you, making me doubt the best thing that ever happened to our family." Janelle stared at him in shock. "You ended your business partnership. She never cared about Henry or what was best for him. She only cared about controlling me, about keeping me isolated and dependent on her validation." Jack's jaw clenched with anger. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you from her poison." Before Janelle could respond, her phone rang. Kingston's name flashed on the screen, and Jack's expression shifted when he saw it. "Answer it," he said quietly. "Please. I have a feeling your brother has information you need to hear." With shaking fingers, Janelle accepted the call and put it on speaker. "Nell, thank God." Kingston's voice filled the small office. "I've been trying to reach you for days. You need to know what I've discovered about Jack Leo." Jack watched her face intently, and something in his expression told her he knew exactly what her brother was about to reveal. "I hired a private investigator to look into him," Kingston continued, "because I was worried about you working for a wealthy white family. But what I found, Nell, this man isn't what I thought." "What do you mean?" Janelle asked, though she could see the answer written in Jack's eyes. "He's been anonymously funding the Bright Futures Community Center for 3 years, Kingston said, his voice filled with amazement. "When the city threatened to shut it down due to budget cuts, mysterious donations started appearing, enough to keep the doors open and expand programs. The room began to spin around Janelle. That's not all, is it? The Brielle Leo Memorial Scholarship Fund, Kingston continued. He's put 63 kids through college in the past 7 years. Full rides, Nell. Books, room and board, everything. All children who lost parents, just like his son. Janelle stared at Jack through her tears. Why? She whispered. Because Henry isn't the only child who's lost a parent, Jack said softly. Because there are kids out there who need someone to believe in them the way you believed in Henry. Because every child deserves a chance to heal and grow and become who they're meant to be. And because, he continued, his voice breaking slightly, I've been trying to become the kind of man who deserves the woman who saved my family. There's more. Kingston's voice crackled through the phone. He's been defending you, Nell. Publicly. When Eliana Foster tried to spread rumors about your relationship with the family, he shut her down. When business associates questioned your place in his life, he made it clear that anyone who disrespected you wasn't welcome in his circle. The weight of everything she'd misunderstood crashed over Janelle like a wave. While she'd been running away to protect them, Jack had been fighting for them. While she'd interpreted his silence as indifference, he'd been respecting what he thought was her choice to leave. You've been fighting for us all along, she said, the words barely audible. Every single day, Jack confirmed, stepping closer. I just didn't know how to fight for us in a way that wouldn't hurt you more than you were already hurting. And I thought leaving was protecting Henry from getting too attached, Janelle whispered. He was already attached, Jack said gently. We both were. The damage was done the moment you walked into our lives and showed us what love could look like. They stood in the small office, surrounded by the sounds of children learning and playing beyond the walls, while the truth settled between them like sunlight after a storm. So what happens now? Kingston asked from the forgotten phone. Jack reached for Janelle's hands, his touch gentle but certain. Now we stop being afraid of what we feel. Now we go home and show Henry that sometimes love requires courage, but it's always worth fighting for. Janelle looked into Jack's eyes, eyes that held hope and fear and desperate love in equal measure, and made her choice. Let's go home, she said. Chapter 9. Fighting for Forever. 16 weeks after first walking into the Leo estate, Janelle discovered that fighting for love required more courage than walking away, and that sometimes the biggest battles were won not with grand gestures, but with quiet persistence and the simple decision to choose each other every single day. The drive back to the Leo estate felt like traveling through time itself. As Jack's car wound through the familiar mountain roads, Janelle pressed her face to the passenger window and watched the autumn landscape blur past in shades of gold and crimson. Her heart hammered with each mile that brought them closer to home, because that's what it was, she realized. Home. He might not forgive me, she said quietly, breaking the silence between them. The weight of her abandonment pressed against her chest like a stone. Jack glanced at her, his hands steady on the steering wheel. Henry, Janelle, that boy has been writing you letters every day for 2 weeks. Trust me, forgiveness isn't going to be the issue. But I hurt him, Janelle insisted, guilt rising in her throat. I left him when he needed me most. I became just another person who abandoned him. Stop, Jack said firmly, pulling the car over at the scenic overlook, the same spot where Janelle had stopped on her very first day to gather courage. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched out before them, touched with late afternoon gold. Look at me. Janelle turned to face him, seeing the man who had fought for them, even when she'd given up hope. You didn't abandon him, Jack said gently but with absolute conviction. You made a choice you thought was best for everyone, even though it was killing you. That's not abandonment, Janelle. That's sacrifice. That's love. It's the same thing to a 7-year-old, Janelle whispered, tears threatening to spill over. No, Jack said firmly, reaching over to take her hand. It's not. And you know how I know that? Because Henry never stopped believing you loved him. Even when he couldn't understand why you left, he never doubted that you cared. That kind of trust doesn't come from abandonment. It comes from a foundation so strong that not even separation can shake it. Janelle squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his certainty, from the love she could see shining in his blue eyes. "What if Mrs. Rivers is angry with me?" she asked, the fears tumbling out now. "What if Dr. Caldwell thinks I'm unstable? What if Henry's regression is permanent? What if we take this one step at a time?" Jack interrupted gently. "What if we focus on what we can control and trust that the people who love us will understand?" They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Janelle of hope. "I need to tell you something," Jack said suddenly, his voice soft with vulnerability, "about why I really let you go so easily." Janelle turned to face him fully, seeing the conflict and pain in his expression. "I was terrified," Jack admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just of what people would think, or of the complications, but of losing someone else I loved. When Brielle died, it nearly destroyed me. The idea of opening my heart again, of letting someone become that important to Henry and to me, it felt like setting myself up for devastation." "And now?" Janelle asked softly. Jack's smile was rueful but determined, filled with the quiet courage of a man who had finally learned the difference between existing and living. "Now I realize that losing you, really losing you, would be the devastation. Not loving you, not fighting for us, not giving Henry the family he deserves, that would be the real tragedy." As they pulled through the gates of the Leo estate, Janelle saw Mrs. Rivers standing on the front steps, her grey hair gleaming in the afternoon light like a beacon of welcome. The older woman's face was carefully composed, but Janelle could see the hope and relief warring in her expression. "Janelle," Mrs. Rivers said as they approached, her voice thick with emotion and barely contained joy. "Thank the Lord you're back, child." "Mrs. Rivers," Janelle began, "I'm so sorry." But the older woman cut her off with a fierce hug that smelled like lavender and forgiveness, and the kind of unconditional love that Janelle had thought existed only in fairy tales. "Don't you apologize to me, child," Mrs. Rivers said fiercely, holding her tight. "You were protecting your heart the only way you knew how. But that boy in there," she gestured toward the house with a trembling hand, "he's been nothing but a shadow of himself since you left." "Where is he?" Janelle asked, her heart already racing toward the reunion she'd been both longing for and dreading. "In his mother's studio," Mrs. Rivers said softly, her voice gentle with understanding. "That's where he goes when the world gets too big for him to handle alone." Janelle found Henry exactly where Mrs. Rivers had said he would be, curled up in the window seat surrounded by his mother's paintings, clutching the photograph of Brielle that had become his security blanket. He looked smaller than she remembered, more fragile, and the sight of him made her chest tight with love and regret and fierce determination. "Henry," she called softly from the doorway, her voice barely above a whisper. The little boy's head snapped up, his green eyes wide with disbelief and desperate hope. For a moment, neither of them moved, afraid that speaking or moving might break the spell and reveal this reunion to be just another dream. "Mama Janelle?" Henry whispered, his voice rusty from disuse and tears. "Are you real?" "I'm real, baby boy," Janelle said, stepping into the room with arms open wide. "I'm so real, and I'm so sorry I left you." Henry launched himself from the window seat, straight into her arms with the force of a small hurricane, wrapping his thin arms around her neck and burying his face against her shoulder. She could feel his tears soaking through her shirt, could feel his small body shaking with relief and joy and residual fear. "I thought you were never coming back," he sobbed against her neck. "I thought I did something wrong and made you leave like Mama Brielle did." "Oh, sweetheart, no," Janelle said fiercely, holding him as tightly as she dared. "You didn't do anything wrong. You are perfect and wonderful and the best little boy in the entire world. I left because I was scared, not because of anything you did." "Scared of what?" Henry asked, pulling back to look at her with those wise, perceptive eyes that saw far too much for a 7-year-old. "I was scared of loving you and your daddy too much," she said honestly, because Henry deserved nothing less than the truth. Sometimes grown-ups think that if they love something too much, they might lose it, so they try to protect themselves by leaving first. Henry considered this with the gravity that children brought to life's most important revelations. "That's silly," he said finally, with the blunt honesty that only 7-year-olds possessed. "You can't love someone too much. Love just makes more love." The simple wisdom of his words made both Jack and Janelle laugh through their tears. "You're absolutely right," Janelle said, smoothing his golden hair with gentle fingers. "Love just makes more love. And I love you so much, Henry Leo." "I love you too, Mama Janelle," Henry said, then looked over her shoulder at his father. "And Daddy loves you too, even when he's being scared about it." "I'm done being scared about it," Jack said, coming to kneel beside them on the studio floor. "I'm going to love Mama Janelle out loud from now on, okay?" Henry nodded approvingly, then settled himself comfortably in Janelle's lap, as if he planned to never let her go again. "Good, because we're a family now, and families don't leave each other." They spent the rest of the afternoon in Brielle's studio, the three of them together in the space that had once been a shrine to loss, but was now something else. A bridge between past and future, between grief and hope, between the family that was and the family that could be. As the sun set through the tall windows, Henry fell asleep in Janelle's arms, exhausted by the emotional intensity of their reunion. Jack carefully lifted his son and carried him to his own bedroom, tucking him in with the tenderness that had first made Janelle fall in love with him. "He'll probably have nightmares tonight," Jack said quietly as they stood in Henry's doorway, watching the little boy sleep peacefully for the first time in 2 weeks. "He's been having them since you left. Dreams that everyone he loves disappears." "Then we'll take turns sitting with him," Janelle said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Whatever he needs." Jack turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw not just love, but respect and admiration and something that looked like awe. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked softly. "We all got lucky," Janelle corrected, taking his hand and threading their fingers together. "We found each other." That night, as they sat in Jack's living room planning how to help Henry heal from the trauma of their separation, Janelle realized that coming back hadn't been the hard part. The hard part would be staying, not just physically, but emotionally. It would mean fighting every day against the voice in her head that whispered she didn't belong. But as she looked at Jack, really looked at him, she saw a man who was willing to fight those same battles beside her. A man who had spent weeks defending her to people who thought she wasn't good enough, who had ended business relationships rather than compromise his principles. "What happens now?" she asked. Jack took her hand, threading their fingers together with the certainty of a man who had finally stopped being afraid of his own heart. "Now we build something beautiful together," he said simply. "Now we show Henry what it looks like when people choose love over fear. Now we prove that families aren't just born. They're made by people who decide to love each other every single day." As if summoned by their conversation, Henry appeared in the living room doorway, his golden hair mussed from sleep, and his green eyes bright with the remnants of a dream. "Mama Janelle," he said softly, "are you staying this time?" Janelle looked at this precious child who had stolen her heart from the very first day, then at the man who had shown her what it meant to be truly loved, and felt something settle deep in her chest. A peace she'd never known she was searching for. "I'm staying, sweet boy," she said firmly, I'm staying forever." Henry smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him since her return, and padded over to climb into her lap one more time. "Good," he said with satisfaction, settling against her chest as if he belonged there. "Because we're a family now, and families don't leave each other." As Janelle held Henry close and felt Jack's hand warm in hers, she realized that the little boy was absolutely right. They were a family now, imperfect and unconventional, and built on a foundation of loss and hope in equal measure. But they were theirs. Chapter 10. Love's True Language. Few months later, Janelle returned to the Leo estate. She discovered that happily ever after wasn't a destination you reached. It was a daily choice to love courageously, fight fiercely for what mattered, and believe that some bonds were strong enough to transform not just hearts, but entire worlds. The morning of the charity gala dawned crisp and clear, with spring painting the Blue Ridge Mountains in shades of emerald and gold that took Janelle's breath away. As she stood in front of the full-length mirror in what had become their bedroom, she adjusted the flowing navy dress that Jack had insisted on buying for her. "You're nervous," Jack said from behind her, his voice warm with affection as he appeared in the mirror's reflection, devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo. "Terrified," Janelle corrected, smoothing the elegant fabric one more time. "This is your world, Jack. These are your people. What if they don't accept me?" Jack stepped closer, his hands settling on her shoulders as he met her eyes in the mirror. "Then they're not my people," he said simply, with the quiet strength that had made her fall in love with him. "You and Henry. You're my people. Everyone else is just noise." 6 months of being back at the Leo estate had taught Janelle many things. She'd learned that love could grow stronger even when tested by external pressures. She'd learned that Jack's business associates fell into 2 camps, those who genuinely cared about his happiness and welcomed her with open arms, and those who revealed their true colors through subtle disdain. Most importantly, she'd learned that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. "Mama Janelle! Daddy!" Henry's voice rang out from downstairs, filled with excitement and joy. "Mrs. Rivers says the car is here." Tonight's gala was the annual fundraiser for the Brielle Leo Memorial Foundation. For the first time since Brielle's death, Jack had decided to attend and speak publicly about the foundation's work. It was a huge step for a man who had spent 7 years avoiding anything that reminded him too much of his loss. "You don't have to do this," Janelle said, turning in his arms to study his face. "We could still stay home, have a quiet evening with Henry." Jack's smile was soft but determined, filled with the peace that came from a man who had finally learned to honor the past while embracing the future. "Yes, I do have to do this. Brielle's legacy deserves to be celebrated, and I'm finally ready to celebrate it. Besides," he added, his blue eyes twinkling with mischief and love, "I want the whole world to see the woman I'm going to marry." The casual way he dropped the word marry made Janelle's heart skip, even though they'd been discussing their future together for months. There had been no formal proposal yet, but there was an understanding between them, a certainty that this was forever. "Is that a proposal, Mr. Leo?" she teased, straightening his bow tie with hands that trembled only slightly with anticipation. "That's a promise," Jack replied, capturing her hands and bringing them to his lips. "The proposal is coming soon. I'm just waiting for the perfect moment." Downstairs, they found Henry resplendent in his first tuxedo, his golden hair neatly combed and his green eyes bright with excitement. Mrs. Rivers fussed over him like a proud grandmother, adjusting his bow tie and smoothing down a stubborn cowlick. "Don't you look handsome?" Janelle said, kneeling down to his level. "The most handsome boy at the whole gala." "Do you think Mama Brielle would be proud of me?" Henry asked, the question that was never far from his thoughts. "I think," Jack said, joining them and placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, that your mama would be so proud she'd probably ask the angels to take pictures so she could show them off to everyone in heaven." Henry giggled at the image, and they made their way to the waiting car, a family heading out into the world together, ready to face whatever came their way. The grand ballroom at the Jefferson Hotel in Richmond was transformed into an elegant wonderland of soft lights and spring flowers. As they entered the ballroom, Janelle felt every eye turn toward them, felt the whispered conversations that followed in their wake. "Mr. Leo," a distinguished older woman approached them with a warm smile. "How wonderful to see you, and this must be the famous Janelle we've heard so much about." The woman was Dr. Patricia Whitmore, president of the Children's Hospital that was one of the Foundation's major beneficiaries. Her acceptance of Janelle was genuine and warm, and it set the tone for much of the evening. There were some cold shoulders, some barely concealed disdain from certain social circles, but there were also more people than Janelle had expected who welcomed her with genuine kindness. "The Foundation has helped over 80 children so far," Dr. Whitmore was saying. "Children who lost parents, children who needed medical care, children who just needed someone to believe in their potential. Your work is literally changing lives, Mr. Leo." "It's not just my work," Jack said, his arm tightening around Janelle's waist with pride and love. "Janelle has been instrumental in developing our new mentorship program. She understands these children in ways I never could." When it came time for Jack to speak, Janelle and Henry found seats at the front table. Jack looked calm and confident as he approached the podium, but Janelle could see the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted the microphone. "7 years ago," Jack began, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, "I lost my wife Brielle during childbirth. For years I thought that loss had taken everything from me except my son. I thought love was a finite resource, that opening my heart again would somehow diminish what Brielle and I had shared." He paused, his eyes finding Janelle's in the crowd. "I was wrong," he continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Love isn't finite, it's infinite. It grows and multiplies and creates space for new blessings without diminishing what came before. Tonight, I want to tell you about someone who embodies that belief." Janelle's heart began to race as Jack continued speaking, telling the story of a woman who had come into their lives as a cleaner but had become so much more, a healer, a teacher, a bridge between a broken father and his silent son. "Janelle Holt," Jack said, his voice strong and clear and filled with love, "saved my family. She took a house that was a museum to grief and turned it back into a home. She took a man who was afraid to love again and showed him that the heart has infinite capacity for joy. She took a boy who had lost his voice and gave him back his song." The ballroom was completely silent now, hundreds of people hanging on every word. "So tonight," Jack continued, "as we celebrate Brielle's legacy and the children we've been able to help, I want to also celebrate the woman who showed us that love multiplies rather than divides. Janelle, would you join me up here?" Janelle's blood turned to ice. This wasn't part of the plan, but Henry whispered urgently beside her, "Go, Mama Janelle. Daddy needs you." On shaking legs, Janelle made her way to the stage. When she reached Jack's side, he took her hand and faced the crowd with the confidence of a man who had finally stopped caring about other people's opinions. "This woman," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "represents everything beautiful about love's power to heal and transform. Janelle, you are my heart, my home, my partner in all things. You saved my family when we didn't even know we needed saving. Will you marry me?" He dropped to one knee right there on the stage in front of 500 people. The ring he held was simple and elegant, a classic solitaire that caught the ballroom lights and threw rainbows across his face, but it was the expression in his blue eyes that made Janelle's breath catch. Pure love, absolute certainty, and the quiet courage of a man who was no longer afraid of his own happiness. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The ballroom erupted in applause as Jack slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her with the passion of a man who had finally claimed his future. When they broke apart, Janelle looked out at the crowd and saw faces transformed by the power of witnessing true love. But the face that mattered most was Henry's. The little boy was standing on his chair, clapping and cheering with the pure joy of a child whose family was finally complete. 6 months later, the wedding was held in the garden of the Leo estate, among the sunflowers that Janelle and Henry had planted together. They stood 8 feet tall now, their faces turned toward the sun like golden sentinels blessing the ceremony. Janelle wore her grandmother's pearls and a simple white dress. Henry served as ring-bearer, while Kingston walked Janelle down the petal-strewn aisle with tears streaming down his proud face. As Jack kissed her in the garden surrounded by sunflowers and love, Janelle felt a profound sense of completeness. This wasn't the end of their story, it was the beginning of forever. 2 years later, Janelle stood in the doorway of what had once been Brielle's art studio, now transformed into a classroom where she homeschooled Henry and taught art to children from the community center. The walls still held some of Brielle's paintings, but they were joined now by Henry's artwork and pieces created by the children Janelle taught. "Mama Janelle," Henry called from his easel, now 9 years old and tall for his age, "come see what I painted." The canvas showed their family, Jack, Janelle, Henry, and nestled in Janelle's arms, baby Isabella, their 6-month-old daughter, who had Jack's blue eyes and Janelle's gentle spirit. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Janelle said, shifting Isabella to her hip. "What's this here?" She pointed to a glowing figure in the background. "That's Mama Brielle," Henry said matter-of-factly. "She's watching over us. She's happy that we're all together." As if summoned by the mention of family, Jack appeared in the doorway, home from his morning meetings. The sight of him still made Janelle's heart flutter. "How are my 4 favorite people?" he asked, kissing Janelle softly before taking Isabella into his arms. 4, Henry corrected seriously. 4 favorite people. Mama Brielle counts too. As Janelle watched her husband with their daughter and listened to Henry chattering about his painting, she marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From that first day when she'd been hired as a cleaner, through all the heartbreak and healing, the obstacles and triumphs, it had all led to this moment. A house that was truly a home, a family built on love and choice and daily acts of devotion, a future that stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility. Outside the window, the sunflowers swayed in the afternoon breeze, their faces turned toward the sun, reaching always toward the light, just like the love that had grown in this house, in this family, in these hearts that had learned to hope again. It was, Janelle thought, the most beautiful story she'd ever been part of. And they were only just beginning.